Hello and welcome to Sallie's Custom Clayworks. Today we're going to be making dinosaur fossils. Super fun project, and it's a great introduction to mold making. Today we're going to be using plaster and clay and whatever fun objects we can find, including our dinosaur that we got in our kit, to make our dinosaur fossils. It's a lot of fun. So, you ready to get started? In order to do this project, we need our supplies. You'll need your plate, your popsicle stick, half a cup of water, and a Tupperware container. You'll need your plaster, your clay from your kit, a rolling pin if you happen to have one, and then you're also going to want to get your dinosaur out. And if you have another dinosaur laying around your house that you want to make a fossil, you'll have enough to make 2 fossil impressions. Or you can pick a different kind of object that you have in your house, as long as it's either plastic or wood. You wouldn't want to use a stuffed animal or something like that, but you want it to be small. So I have here this little turtle. He's got some fun texture. I have this plastic fish that I thought might be kind of fun as an impression. And I also have a carrot. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to incorporate these 3 things together yet, but I might come up with a scene that I like using them all. You might want to think about what kind of scene you wanted to do, and if you want to do both dinosaur impressions on one piece of clay, you could certainly do that. Okay, I think we're about to get started. So your kit should have enough clay to make 2 fossil impressions. You can do both dinosaurs. If you have a dinosaur laying around, another one that you want to try, you can do that. We tried some pine cones and a truck on this one. I don't know if you can see it from the video, but it does look pretty cool. So any object that you can press into the clay that's not going to stick to the clay could work quite well. If you have a piece of paper that you can lay out on the table, I would recommend doing that. But if you don't, you can work on your plate. I'm just going to use the paper because it's a little bit more convenient and I don't have to work in this circle. But if you don't have paper, go ahead and use your paper plate and make your clay slab on your plate. I'm just going to set that aside. The first thing you're going to want to do is soften your clay up. This is recycled clay, so it might be a little hard. So you're going to have to work on it with your hand a little bit. Using the palm of your hand, you're going to hit your clay and start to flatten it out. And I like to use a rolling pin. If you have a rolling pin, you can roll it out. And the idea is to make it as big as our project, maybe just a little bit bigger than our project. I'll show you why. So we're going to roll out 2 of these. I'm going to do 1 for my dinosaur, and I'm going to do 1 for my other object. I think I'm going to pick this fish, and I'm going to do it this way so you can see what I'm doing. So there's my dinosaur one, and you can see it's plenty big enough. It has enough space around the outside of it for a ledge, and that's going to be really important. So you want to roll your slab out, make it just a little bit bigger than your item. Then I'm going to do the other one. So same thing. This is recycled clay, so it's a little hard. We don't want it to be really wet clay or it'll make it hard to do the plaster in it. It'll get too wet. So I'm going to roll this out. And again, you want this to be a little bit bigger than your object. And you will want it to be nice and smooth and flat. So make it look nice. You'll notice that I'm picking it up off of my paper and kind of turning it. It helps it so I can get it a little bigger. You can also put it on your plate and work on it on your plate. Okay, next step is you're going to make your impression. It's really important when you make your impression to press it in and then kind of make sure you're pressing in each one of the parts and kind of turning it as you go, but not picking it up and moving it around and pressing it, because you want to have one good impression. So what I'm going to do is I would pick, well, you could pick either side really, but pick a side that you're going to get the majority of the body. So see how this one is curved in kind of an S shape? I'm gonna pick this side because I think it's gonna be a little easier to get an impression on that curved side. So I'm gonna start at the head and I'm gonna kind of walk it down, pressing all the way down to the feet and pick it up. And ooh, I got a nice impression. This one is kind of hard to make an impression of because it has these fins. And if you didn't get one of the fins or you missed something, you can always put it back on there and try to get a better impression of it. Just be careful not to mess up what you already made. And then you're going to take the edges and pinch them upward. This is going to make a ledge so that when we pour our plaster, it doesn't go all over the table. So really important step to turn our edge up. Okay, so now if you have extra room, you can put your name on it. You can put what kind of dinosaur is on there using a pencil, or if you have stamps, you could do that. The tricky thing is you have to do it backwards. So when you're writing, this is a mirror image of whatever you make. So when I pull it off of here, the beginning letter is going to be on this side, on this. So I have to do my letters backwards, okay? I'm not going to do that because it will take some time, but you could practice on a piece of paper first and then put it up in the mirror and see if it's correct or not. And then if it is, you know that you could transfer it onto here, and when you pull it off, it should be the correct way. Okay, so that is my dinosaur. Now this one I'm going to make a little scene, I think. And I really like this little fish, so I'm gonna do the same thing that I did before. Start at one end, kind of make my impression. And this plastic, oh boy, this plastic is sticking. So I picked this knowing that it probably wouldn't work. And I just wanted to show that if you pick an object that doesn't go in the clay very well, to just find another object that you like better that could work. So I'm gonna re-flatten this out. And that fish did not work. Let's try this turtle. Let's see, starting at one end, rotating it down. Oh, he made a nice impression, although I'm not entirely sure that I could tell that that's a turtle, but maybe I'll use this carrot to make some dots or some fun texture on my clay. I also have, you could use stamps even. If you have stamps laying around, you could use stamps on your clay to make some impressions. Sometimes stamps also want to stick to the clay, and you can put a little bit of cornstarch on your stamp, and that could help. So let's say that I really loved this. If I did, then I would use it, but if not, you can crumple it up and try again. Okay, so I crumpled it up, kind of smacked it with my hand to get a lot of the air bubbles out. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can hit it with your hand, flatten it out with your hand. Most people have a rolling pin laying around though, I hope. So I have this all set out. I'm actually going to make an impression of this plate that I ordered online, and this is called a texture plate, and I was curious to see if I could make a mold out of it. So, ooh, it works lovely. Okay, so I'm going to roll up my sides. You could even use a leaf that you found outside that you really like. This is reminding me of leaves. That's kind of a fun texture, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I've got that on there, and maybe I'll try to put my name on here. Let's see if I can do it backwards. So when I have my impression, it's gonna come this way. Ooh, tricky, tricky. S-A-L-L-I, and ooh, I don't know if I can do the E. The E is tricky. E, did I do it right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can always pick it up and look at it in front of the mirror and say, ooh, did I do this right? I hope so. Okay, so I've got my, turn that to you so you can see it. That looks pretty cool, right? Now it's time to do the fun part, mixing the plaster. Now, if you're a kid, this is a really good time to get a parent to help, okay? Plaster can be really messy, and we don't want to get it on furniture. We don't want to get it on our table, and it's very sticky. What you will need for your plaster to water ratio is 3/4 cup of water, and then you'll also need 1.5 cups of plaster, and that should be plenty for both of your impressions. The ratio for water to plaster is for every 1 part of water, we're going to use 2 parts of plaster. So if you think about using 1/2 cup of water, how much plaster are we going to need? 2 half cups, which is equal to 1 cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of this in at a time, and I'm just gonna kind of sprinkle it in. There's kind of a trick to know if you've used enough plaster, and that is that it will start to pile up in there, and then eventually it will stop soaking into the water. Doing this nice and slowly, and I'm getting it inside the water and not on my table. And you'll see the water's still soaking in, but it's making this pile in here, and that's okay. The water, we're going to wait for about 3 minutes, and the water should soak all the way up to the top of this peak. So we're just going to let it sit for a minute until it's soaking in, and it's kind of fun to watch. You can just take a minute to watch it all soak in. Still soaking in. The reason why we want to wait for it to soak in is because what will happen is it'll get really chunky on us if we don't. We don't want it to be chunky. You can kind of hit it with your finger to try to get the last bit soaked in. Okay, we're there. Now we can start mixing. We're going to gently mix with our tongue depressor, or whatever you call this thing.
Popsicle stick.
Popsicle stick, there we go. And I'm gently stirring. And we're going to stir until it looks like it's starting to thicken up. We don't want to let it get really thick on us though. So just before it starts to thicken up, we're going to pour it. And I would say about 1.5 minutes. So if you're wanting a time, 1.5 minutes is what we're going to go for. No more than 3 minutes though, because you want, when you're pouring it in there, you still want it to be liquid. If you wait until it starts to get thick on you and you start pouring it in there, you're going to get a bunch of bubbles, and you don't want a bunch of bubbles. Make sure while you're stirring, just take another look at your impressions and make sure that the sides are high enough. So when you pour in there, you're not going to get plaster all over your table. Okay, so this is looking really good. You want it to be the consistency of thick cream. So I got my plaster here. It looks like thick cream. It is now time to pour. So very carefully, I'm going to pour half of this into one of the molds. And then the other half into the other mold, and uh-oh, I didn't give myself quite enough plaster, which means when you guys do this, the ratio will be different. So let's see. then I'll probably be giving you 3/4 of a cup of plaster. So I'll have to figure out how much water that is. But I have to wait for these to sit for approximately 30 minutes. You can wait as long as you want. But what will happen is these will start to heat up, and then after they heat up, they will start to cool down. So when you touch them and they're feeling cool, then it's time to open them up. But I would wait at the minimum a half an hour. Okay, I'll see you in a little bit and we'll open these babies up. Okay, so we took a moment and figured out what our plaster to water ratio is going to be. We didn't have quite enough plaster for this second impression, so I'm gonna give you guys a little bit more plaster. So in your kit, you should have 1.5 cups of plaster, which means when you get set up for this, you're gonna need 3/4 cup of water, and that should be more than enough to get your project going. So one thing I didn't mention was, what do we do with these things? You cannot or should not rinse them off into your sink. Plaster will clog your drain and it will get everywhere. So if you want to save these things, you can rinse them off outside, but they're disposable, so I'm just going to toss them out in the trash. Hello and welcome back. It's time to open up our molds. It's been sitting for approximately a half an hour. They're cool to the touch, they're no longer hot, and they're ready to be opened. So let's open them. What we're going to do is we're going to very carefully peel back the clay along the outside. And we don't need to worry about the clay breaking, but we don't want to break our plaster. Ooh, that looks cool. Okay, so there's one. Let's see how our dinosaur looks. This one didn't quite have enough plaster, so hopefully we can see something interesting. Oh, nice. This man made a lovely impression, even though it is very, very thin. So this is going to be really fragile and probably not the best example of the dinosaur fossils, but anyway, so now we're going to set these aside and we're going to let them cure. We want them to be dry to the touch. So we're going to wait approximately a week and a half before painting these. I know it's a while, but it'll be worth the wait. Meanwhile, after a few days, you could take a Dremel or a drilling tool and you can drill 2 small holes near the top. Ask a parent for help with that. And you can find some yarn or string to hang them up. But just keep them in a safe place where they can cure and don't really mess with them much. One thing you could consider doing is just cleaning up this sharp edge that's around the outside. You can do that with like an old butter knife would work just fine. I tend to use these potter's tools and just kind of run around the edge, but any blunt object will work. Butter knife works great for this sort of thing. Just going around that edge, getting the really sharp part off so nobody gets cut once it's dry. It probably wouldn't cut somebody, but I like to round off the edge. That way it's not falling apart on me also, because that edge will be really fragile. And if you didn't put your name on it before, which, hey, that turned out right. Even though I was doing the opposite, it turned out correct. You can carve your name into the back of it now. You can even use a pencil to carve your name into the back of it. Just be gentle. You don't want to push really hard or you'll break it. So I'll demonstrate that on this one. I can take any sharp tool really and carve my name into it and put the year. Voila. This one, I'm also going to go around that edge. Ooh, it's super thin. Not enough plaster. Oh well, this one will probably end up in the trash. But it was a good experience. I usually chalk my mistakes up to a good experience. That makes it worth doing, right?
Right.
Okay, so there you are, your dinosaur fossil. Let it cure for a few weeks and then we'll come back and paint it together. See you soon. Okay, hello and welcome back. Now we are going to paint our little piece here. You can see that mine broke. This one, when we were making it, I had said that it was way too thin, and it's still way too thin. But I'm just gonna paint it up just so you can see how to do it. So you're going to want to take your non-metallic paint, and you should have two paints. You should have a non-metallic and a metallic. I'm gonna pick up this non-metallic, and we're gonna paint the whole thing with our non-metallic first. And we want it to be nice and thin. We do not want to do it really super thick, or we're not going to see all of our details. So I'm really spreading it out over the top. And this brush is pretty stiff. If you have a softer brush, that would probably be better. I'm using a stiff brush because in your kit I gave you one stiff brush. And the purpose of that is to hit all the highlights on your piece when you put your beautiful metallic over the top, and that's really going to show up all of your details, but it does make it kind of hard to paint this surface. So again, if you have a softer brush, that's probably better for the initial coat, but it'll work for now. You can see that this is drying pretty quick. It's been about 2 weeks since I poured this up, and the plaster has totally cured. It's all dried out and it is ready to accept some moisture. And plaster is a great tool for clay because, and we use it a lot for molds because it has a tendency to soak up moisture. So we use plaster for making what we call slip cast molding, and that's where you pour liquid clay into a mold, and the plaster soaks up all the water, leaving a shell of clay behind. So it's a really handy tool to know how to use if you are a clay person. This is just a very good introduction to making molds. Your mold that you made is a positive mold. It's what we call a positive because the details pop up at you. So I'm just working to cover the whole surface. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. You can always move this around to see how you can change the angle to help yourself to get all the good coverage. After this is totally painted, we're gonna let it completely dry. And then after it's dry, we're gonna add our metallic, and we're just gonna hit the high surfaces with it. And that's gonna bring out all of our beautiful details. Again, you don't wanna do globs of paint. You want it to be a nice, even, thin coat. If you add globs of paint to this, what's going to happen is it's going to cover up your details, and then when you go to put your metallic on, you're not going to see all your beautiful little details from your dinosaur. I'm just working this in. One thing I didn't mention is putting holes in this. You can put 2 holes near the top, or even just 1 hole in. If you happen to have a Dremel, you can use a drill bit, a very small drill bit, and drill a hole in. Or if a parent has a sharp pointy tool, maybe like a, what would work? Clothespin, not a clothespin, what is that? One of those sharp little tools, like a tack or something. You might be able to try to put a hole in it, but the easiest method that I found is to use a Dremel. You can use a drill attachment to it and drill it in. Ask a parent for help with that, of course. Don't just go and do it. You could break it pretty easily. You could also just leave it out on your shelf at home as a decoration in your room. I like to hang them on the wall myself. Makes it kind of nice. Okay, so I have my thin coat on there, and I'm going to just let it dry. Make sure I covered up all the little spots. Let me see if I got it all. There's a little spot under there and under there. Okay, so now we're just gonna wait a few minutes and then we will be back to show you how to add your metallic. Okay, and welcome back. It has been a few minutes and my piece is starting to dry. It's almost dry. What I want you to do to test to see if it's dry is just take your finger and press it on there and pull it off. If it leaves some color behind, then it's not totally dry yet. So we're just gonna give this one a few more minutes. It's probably gonna take about 7 minutes for it to dry completely. Okay, welcome back. So this has completely dried and we are now ready to hit the highlights with our metallic paint. So you're gonna wanna find your metallic paint inside of your kit. It's the one that has the shiny bits in it. I have 2 different metallics here. I'm probably gonna use the white one to show everybody the details. Okay, so first things first, you're going to need to take your brush and dry it off really, really well. You might want to use an old towel. Don't use your mom's nice towel. Or a paper towel could work, or even a napkin. So we dry it off really well. Now we are going to hit the highlights using a technique called dry brushing. Dry brushing is simply where we use a dry brush to hit the highlights. You do not need very much paint. Put a little paint on the tip of the brush, wipe some of it off on the table, excuse me, and then we're very gently going to hit the highlights with this brush. We're going to start around the edge just to make sure we don't have too much paint. That's looking quite nice. And remember, a little bit of paint goes a long ways. I'm gonna do some over here. Okay. Now, if you're having a hard time with this or you're using too much paint, get an adult to help you. Next, we're going to hit the highlights of our dinosaur. The easiest way to do that is to find your texture, and you're going to go against your texture. So the texture in my dinosaur all goes this way, up and down. We're going to be painting going left to right over the top of my texture. So again, grabbing a little tiny bit of paint, wiping some of it off on the table, and I'm just going across that texture very gently with a little bit of paint, hitting the highlights. This is called dry brushing. It's a fun technique. Brings out all those neat little details. Oops, I used a little bit too much paint there, so I'm going to have to really spread it out. If I use too much paint, then I'm just going to be painting it white. I don't want to do that. I just want to hit the highlights. This is going to really bring out the texture of my fossil. Okay, that looks pretty cool. So now that I have the highlights done, I can put a couple of holes near the top to hang it up on the wall and then put some string on there. When you drill your holes, you might want to use a Dremel or a drill. Ask a parent for help with this. Be sure when you drill your hole not to put it super close to the edge or it will break. So you want to put it further away, and if you want to do 2 holes, you can put some string attached to it and hang it up on the wall. It'll look quite nice. If you don't have any string, that's okay. You can just leave it on a shelf or perhaps your dresser or next to your bed or something like that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this fun and exciting dinosaur project. I sure had fun teaching you. Have a great day. Hello and welcome to Sallie's Custom Clayworks. Today we were going to be making, dun dun dun, fossils. This is an example of our fossil project that we did. It's super fun. You get to pick out your very own dinosaur for the project. And you should have a dinosaur in your clay kit that you picked up when you... Stop. That was the test. You'll need a tongue depressor. Is that what that's called?
Popsicle stick.
Popsicle stick. That's what it is. Okay, so I think... Oh, and water. I forgot to mention water. We're also going to need some water. You're going to want to get 1/3 of a cup of water. No, that's not right. Trying to think how much plaster I did. 1/2 cup of water. Okay, so let's do that again. You're also going to need 1/2 cup of water for this project. So we have our, I'm just going to do that again.
Hold it up too when you say it, so when I splice it, I'll see it.
I'm just going to start that segment again. So in order, or maybe a cup of plaster. Because this one is going to be really super thin, so probably not enough in that. Okay, so let's go with 3/4 cup of water next time. 3/4 cup of water. To how much plaster? Anybody know? 3 cups of plaster. Boy, that seems like a lot. Is that correct?
That's a good question.
1.5 times 2 is 3. Yeah, that's a lot of plaster. So we only did 1 cup of plaster. That's probably too much. Okay. So now we